Muy buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. It is a great pleasure to me to welcome you all at the Picasso Museum. This auditorium that is named after a magnificent person who's, along his son, donated an important collection to make this dream of a Picasso museum a reality. We celebrate the 21st anniversary of this inauguration. October 27th, we will celebrate specifically this anniversary, and we will celebrate it by having an open day for all the citizens of Malaga and all the people visiting us. And we will start this anniversary week with an event that makes me particularly happy, which is the presentation of Professor Michael Fitzgerald, who's the curator of the current collection, and with the context of the presentation of the book that we just received, and we invite you all to read it and to have a look at it. It's in the shop, and you can have it signed today by the Professor Michael Fitzgerald. It is a book that has a lot of work behind it, and I wanted to extend my thanks to the marketing and communication departments, to the foundation of Picasso Foundation, and all the people who have taken part in the publication. We have established an annual lesson related to an exhibit that we'll have with us for years, to have Professor Michael Fitzgerald here to give us a lecture once a year. I think it's a fantastic opportunity for us all to understand Picasso in his context. This week we will also have other activities. For example, in the engraving room, we will talk about the engraving technique of Picasso by Dr. Giulio Corombic. I'm sure you've all seen him at the museum and other activities at the museum. Maria Jose Valverde will go a bit more into detail as a responsible for the Department of Cultural Activities. I just wanted to highlight the message of how important this presentation is for us and how important it is for us to have Michael Fitzgerald here, and also having the presence of the responsible curator of this museum, and they will have the opportunity to have a conversation later. I also think it is very important to have Mr. Pablo Salazar, who will present Michael Fitzgerald, who, along with Eugenio Carmona, who is the tenure professor at the University of Malaga, they have started the trajectory that then Mr. Fitzgerald has more delved into. It is very happy. It is a very happy moment for all of us, and I invite you all to come again next year for a second lesson. Without further ado, I will give the floor to Maria Jose Valverde, who will give us a bit more details about the activity this afternoon and the others to come. Thank you very much.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon and welcome to Christine Ruiz Picasso Auditorium, and I wanted to welcome all those following this event through streaming. As the art director said, it is a very special day for us because we start a series of activities that have been designed for the entire week to celebrate the 21st anniversary of the museum. And what best in order to celebrate this anniversary than to go to the very heart of the museum, the collection of works by Pablo Picasso. And to do so, we thought that the best way to do it was to invite Mr. Michael Fitzgerald, who's the curator of the exhibit of the Structures of the Invention, the Unity of an Artwork exhibit, and starting from there, developing a series of activities that we will have all over the week. Tomorrow we will have the opportunity to show you a space dedicated to Pablo Picasso's engraving technique, and we will highlight one of the sites of Picasso's artwork very relevant and yet not very known for the wide public, which is his work as an engraver. And also to highlight the huge collection of engravings that we have in our collection. Friday, we will have another activity for schools with an installation developed along with the group Basurama. And we will have also the concert by Sole Jimenez here at the auditorium. Last but not least, Sunday, we will have a free entrance for all those who want to come. So we invite you to come to the museum on Sunday. If we focus on the program that we have developed for today, as Miguel has mentioned, well, we will start by a masterclass where Michael Fitzgerald will go a bit deeper into some of the themes of the exhibit, and he will present the new catalogue for the collection that will be available from today at the bookstore here inside the museum. Then Paloma Alarco, head of the conservation and modern painting at the museum Thyssen-Bornemisza, will start a conversation with Michael Fitzgerald, and we'll go a bit deeper into other aspects tied to the artworks of one of the most influential artists of our time. Last but not least, we have a very special surprise, which is the presentation of a lifetime dedicated to Pablo Picasso that has been created to put together his life and his artwork. In order to do so, we'll go to the courtyard, and Rose Finocchio will explain more about it. As I mentioned at the beginning, we are celebrating the 21st anniversary of the museum, and we are focusing on Pablo Picasso, and with that aim in mind, and like Miguel López Remiro mentioned, thanks to a collaboration between the University of Malaga and the Picasso Museum, we have created a research center tied to the museum. One of his researchers, Pablo Salazar, will be charged of presenting Mr. Michael Fitzgerald and guide us through a path showing his trajectory tied to Picasso's artwork. Thank you very much for your attention, and have a pleasant afternoon.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. As a scholarship student of a research center on Pablo Picasso, it is a great pleasure for me to present one of the main experts in the theme we study. Given that since we started our research at University of Malaga on behalf of Professor Michael Fitzgerald has always been present, and his career has been a source of inspiration for all of us.
Nos gustaría saludar al presidente del Consejo.
Starting, I would like to welcome Paloma Alarco, member of the Executive Committee, Director Miguel López Remiro, and of course, main researcher Professor Eugenio Carmona for all the support and the trust. Mr. Michael Fitzgerald is an art history family professor. In 1976, he got his major at Stanford University. In 1986, he got his master's degree in business administration in Graduate School of Business of Columbia University. 1 year later, he was appointed PhD of the Graduate Schools of Arts and Sciences of the same university with a thesis defended in 1987 titled Pablo Picasso's Monument to Guillaume Apollinaire, Surrealism and Monumental Sculpture in France. Right after that, he started teaching at the Beaux-Arts department at the Trinity College in Hartford. And right now, he's head of the program of History of Art, and he's a Kluge Family Professor of Art History. Because of his thorough work as a researcher, he's recognized as one of the main specialists on Pablo Picasso. In 1995, he published his first books, Making Modernism, Picasso and the Creation of the Market for 20th Century Art. This work was an immediate success, and it's one of the most quoted studies on modern art. Professor Fitzgerald analyzes how Picasso consolidated his reputation in the art world and how he skillfully managed the commercial dissemination of his work. This analysis is supported by a review of a large body of written correspondence, a correspondence established between Picasso and the new agents of modern arts, such as dealers, gallery owners, and collectors. In this way, Professor Fitzgerald follows the artist's trail in detail. He retraces his first forays into Parisian galleries and observes how the ecosystem of modern art transforms along with commercial strategies, mainly thanks to the alliance between Picasso and the influential art dealers Paul Rosenberg and George Bildenstein. The exciting journey that is making modernism has as its main motivation to map the journey of Picasso's work. A journey that will culminate in the acclaimed retrospective organized by MoMA in 1939. Subsequently, Professor Fitzgerald joined such prestigious figures as Leonard Lauder, John Richardson, and William Rubin in a lecture given at the Metropolitan Museum in New York entitled Picasso and the Art Market, Past, Present and Future. In 1996, Professor Fitzgerald was a contributing author to the catalogue of Picasso and Portraiture, Representation and Transformation, the last exhibition project curated by William Rubin at MoMA. The exhibition's catalogue included a list of authors who are now indispensable for the study of Picasso and modern art itself: Marilyn Macaulay, Robert Rosenblum, Brigitte Leal, and Pierre Day, among others. The famous catalogue included two texts signed by Professor Fitzgerald. In the first, The Modernist's Dilemma, Neoclassicism and the Portrayals of Olga Kloklova, he exhaustively analyzes the portraits devoted to the artist's first wife. In the second, A Triangle of Ambitions, Art, Politics and Family during the post-war years with Françoise Gillot, she studies the vitalist image of the artist who, after World War II, was shown as a family man who seemed to be enjoying his best moment in life. In 1998, he contributed to the catalogue of another important exhibition, Picasso and the War Years, 1937-1945, organized by the San Francisco Museum of Fine Arts and curated by Stephen Nash. Professor Fitzgerald contributed to the catalogue with a text entitled Report from the Hound Fronts, some skirmishes over Picasso's reputation. In it, he discusses the important role played in French art and culture after World War II. Despite not being a French citizen, Picasso became a symbol of the nation's artistic renaissance after the liberation. During the occupation of France by Axis forces, his studio in Paris was a gathering place, and although his political affiliation with the French Communist Party was controversial, his artistic achievement and influence spread it internationally. Professor Fitzgerald will later deliver a related lecture. 7 Rue des Grands Augustins, the artist in his studio during wartime at the Guggenheim Museum. Picasso's studio, in all its dimensions, will continue to be a subject of deep interest to Professor Fitzgerald. In 2001, he curated an exhibition in which the artist's creative space was the central theme. The exhibition was entitled Picasso, the Artist's Studio, and was held first in Connecticut, at the Wadsworth Atheneum in Hartford, then in Ohio, and at the Cleveland Museum of Art. The exhibition catalogue includes an extensive essay in which Professor Fitzgerald studies the role of the atelier as a space, as a concept in Picasso's life and work. He analyzes Picasso's depictions of the artist's studio in paintings, drawings, and prints throughout his life, showing how he found in the walls of the atelier his most profound expression of the creative process. It reviews Picasso's devotion to the studio as a place where he learned his artistic skills, as a social and intellectual center where he negotiated with art dealers, disputed with critics and seduced lovers, as a place to explore the imagination and essential things of life, and a place where he faced the inexorable passage of time. Another favorite theme in Professor Fitzgerald's career is the impact of Picasso on subsequent artistic currents. In 2006, he will develop this line of research through a major exhibition project entitled Picasso and American Art. The exhibition, curated by Professor Fitzgerald, explored the reception of Picasso in the field of modern and contemporary American art. Picasso and American Art was first held at the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York and then at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art on the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis. The catalogue is also notable for its monumental chronology, which documents the reception of Picasso's work in the United States in exhibitions, collections, and publications. Due to the success of Picasso and American Art, 2007 marked the first meeting between Professor Fitzgerald and the Museo Picasso in Malaga. On May 3rd, he was invited to give a lecture entitled The Presence of Picasso in the New York Art Scene. On this occasion, Professor Fitzgerald studied the influence of Picasso in the works of major contemporary artists in the United States, emphasizing Picasso's initial introduction to New York in the 1910s and the important roles of artist and writer Maurice de Sayers in this process. Later, in 2008, he published A Question of Identity for the catalogue Picasso, Marie-Thérèse, and exhibition organized by Aquavella Galleries. In this text, Professor Fitzgerald offers an in-depth interpretation of the series of paintings that Picasso produced between 1931 and 1932, all of them dedicated to the figure of Marie-Thérèse Walter. Professor Fitzgerald analyzes that these works are more than just portraits, as they encompass deeper themes such as the exploration of new forms of artistic expression. The article discusses the historical and artistic context in which Picasso created these works, including his relationship with Matisse and the Surrealist movement, as well as Walter's influence on his artistic evolution. Professor Fitzgerald analyzed the symbols and meanings hidden in these works. These paintings show ultimately Picasso's evolution as an artist, his constant search for new forms of expression, and his ability to address complex and profound themes. The exhaustive analysis of these works and the decisive contribution of this text by Professor Fitzgerald prompted MoMA to invite him again to give a lecture entitled From Private Pleasures to Public Commitments, Picasso's Metamorphic Images of Marie-Thérèse Walter, who was given in 2010. That same year, he participated in the writing of the catalogue for the exhibition Picasso, his first museum exhibition 1932. This exhibition celebrated the important Picasso retrospective held in Zurich in 1932 and the contemporary and very large exhibition organized in Paris by the Galerie Georges Petit. In his text entitled Post-1932, From the Paris and Zurich Retrospective to Guernica, Professor Fitzgerald explores the evolution of Picasso's work in the years leading up to the creation of Guernica. He highlights how Picasso moved from a focus on the human figure and sensual pleasures to a growing interest in political and social issues. During those years, Picasso achieved unprecedented recognition. Similarly, he notes that his relationship with the artist Dora Maar had a significant impact on Picasso's work, especially in the series devoted to the Weeping Woman. In turn, political and social events, such as the Spanish Civil War, influenced the subject matter of Picasso's work. In 2014, Professor Fitzgerald curated the exhibition Post-Picasso Contemporary Reactions, held at the Museo Picasso in Barcelona. It includes 70 works by 40 artists residing in more than 20 countries in Africa, Asia, Europe, the Middle East, North America, and South America. This exhibition reviews the responses that contemporary artists have given to Picasso's life and work in the 40 years since his death, when this appreciation has gone from undisputed to controversial. The exhibition addresses the question of whether Picasso continues to be relevant to contemporary art and examines the various ways in which some current artists draw inspiration from Picasso's work. As a result of the research carried out by Professor Fitzgerald, he presents the paper Post-Picasso Contemporary Reactions at the colloquium Revoir Picasso, organized in 2015 by the Musée National Picasso Paris. Moreover, Professor Fitzgerald studied the figure and critical fortune of Olga Khokhlova in his text Portrait of Olga, the Biographer's Gaze, an article included in the catalogue of the exhibition Olga Picasso. Professor Fitzgerald argues that her figure has been unfairly maligned by many art historians interested in Picasso. He suggests that Khokloba's reputation has been influenced by the negative opinion expressed by interpreters who met Picasso after the marriage, and the essay argues that her figure deserves a more nuanced and less unfair understanding. Shortly after, he participated as moderator in the 4th International Congress Picasso and History, held from October 9 to 11, 2018, and framed in the event celebrating the 15th anniversary of the Picasso Museum, Malaga. In addition, Professor Fitzgerald explored the figure of the Minotaur in Picasso's work in the article Picasso's Minotaurs, included in the catalogue Dialogues with Picasso, Collection 2020-2023. In this text, he analyzes how this Greek myth became a key symbol in the painter's artistic production during the 1930s. Professor Fitzgerald explains that Picasso uses the Minotaur as an alter ego, exploring its duality and internal conflicts. The choice of this particular figure is related to the surrealist movement's interest in the unconscious and classical myth, also linked to aspects of Picasso's own life. Professor Fitzgerald points out that throughout Picasso's work, the representation of the Minotaur evolves in his work from a violent and destructive being to a more vulnerable and human figure. It becomes a political symbol in works such as Franco's Dream and Lie. Through this figure, Picasso creates a complex and fascinating symbolic universe that Professor Fitzgerald turns into an object of study. From February 22 to June 26, 2022, Professor Fitzgerald curated the exhibition Face to Face, Picasso and the Old Masters, organized and held at the Museo Picasso Málaga in collaboration with the Museo de Bellas Artes de Sevilla. In it, a dialogue is established between paintings by masters such as El Greco or Francisco de Zurbarán from the Seville's museum collection, and works by Picasso belonging to the Almina Foundation and Bernard Ruiz Picasso. To paraphrase Professor Fitzgerald, the most striking thing about this exhibition is the profound degree to which Picasso was interested in the old masters. On the other hand, Professor Fitzgerald collaborates in the catalogue of the exhibition The Echo of Picasso with the writing of a text entitled Reflections of the Link of Some Contemporary Artists with the Work of Picasso. In this article, he analyzes Picasso's influence on contemporary art in all its complexity, questioning the notion of influence and proposing the term echoes as a more precise alternative. Professor Fitzgerald argues that the term influence suggests a passive relationship between artists, where one copies or imitates the other. In contrast, the term echoes implies a more complex and dynamic relationship where contemporary artists are inspired by Picasso's work but reinterpret and transform it according to their own vision. Exploring new ideas and styles ultimately, Professor Fitzgerald points out that Picasso's influence has spread beyond Europe and the United States to artists in Africa, Asia and Latin America. Since 2024, the Museo Picasso Málaga has renewed its permanent exhibition with a new show entitled Pablo Picasso, Structures of the Invention, The Unity of a Work, curated by Professor Fitzgerald. The exhibition breaks with the conventional classification of Picasso's work and proposes a more unified vision, showing from a new perspective how the different artistic stages are connected to each other. The exhibition focuses on the artist's creative processes, showing how he constantly innovates and goes backwards to find new forms of expression, including works by Faba that have never been exhibited in Spain. In the words of Professor Fitzgerald, Picasso's creativity arose from two seemingly opposing inspirations, innovation and retrospection. The interplay of these two concepts defines the creative paths that allowed him to integrate Cubism, Neoclassicism, Surrealism and his other innovations into the unity of a lifetime work, something that is evident in Structures of Invention. Professor Fitzgerald, thank you very much for being here this afternoon. You have the floor.
So, thank you, Pablo, for a wonderful introduction. I feel embarrassed. I think you know more about my work than I do. I can only say I've lived a long time, and I've had some wonderful opportunities, including working with the MPM here in FABA, and I feel very grateful for all of that. Oh, sorry. This afternoon, instead of packed galleries, we offer you an uncrowded virtual visit to the exhibition and an opportunity to learn how we assembled a show that we believe will enrich everyone's understanding of Picasso's art, whether you are an expert or just beginning your first visit to the museum. I must begin with an apology. Since I cannot deliver this lecture in Spanish, our translators will present a version of my text in Spanish for you to listen to. In order to be as clear as possible, I will read my text rather than, as I would prefer, speak to you directly. As a curator of this exhibition, it has been my pleasure to work with a remarkable team of professionals at both the Museo Picasso Malaga and the Foundation of Bernard and Almine Ruiz Picasso. Many of these colleagues have taught me about the aspects of Picasso's work that I did not fully understand and have contributed in crucial ways to the exhibition on view in the museum galleries. The collaborative spirit that exists between these two institutions has been crucial to the realization of our project. I would especially like to thank Miguel Lopez Ramiro, the artistic director of the Museo Picasso Malaga, for his generous support, which contributed so much to the warm collegial relationships we enjoyed during the intense experience of installing the exhibition in 12 galleries of the museum. I could not have completed the installation without the wise advice of Sofia Diaz, the coordinator of the museum, who knows every detail of this building and its collection and shares her knowledge with remarkable kindness with those of us who have less experience with the building's often challenging spaces. Ultimately, I owe the greatest debt to Bernard Ruiz Picasso, who offered me the opportunity to organize this exhibition. Not only did he constantly aid us with organizational matters, he regularly shared his deep knowledge of the MPM and FABA collections in ways that greatly improved our choices of works and the placement of them in the galleries. I also thank Paloma Alarco for agreeing to participate in our program today. I very much look forward to our conversation. These days, the uses of the term curator have become problematic, if not ridiculous. On the one hand, the term has been debased by applying it to everything from a selection of shoes in a shop window to an AI-generated personalized offering on the internet, or even an advertisement for beauty products on the side of a bus. I happened to see this bus near my home, and I couldn't resist showing it to you. It's easy to forget that being a curator used to mean caring for a collection of rare and exquisite objects in every way, from securing their safety to studying their meanings over many years. On the other hand, a curator's supposed status is often greatly exaggerated, as if a curator acted alone, based only on her or his inspiration. Therefore, I would like to begin by showing you some of the many people who made essential contributions to our exhibition. Exhibitions are multi-year projects that require a wide variety of skills, ranging from expertise in insurance and shipping to specialists who apply their knowledge of chemistry to the preservation of artworks, and researchers who gather information about the works we are considering for inclusion. In addition, there are the writers, editors, photographers, and printers who create our catalog. Catalog is right here. Far from being independent, a good curator works hand in hand with a team and learns from them. I wish I had time to identify everyone in this photograph. In fact, there are many people involved in the exhibition more than present in this convivial celebration after the opening of the exhibition. Here I'm showing you the first and final galleries of the exhibition. As the title of the exhibition, Structures of Invention, suggests, our subject is Picasso's creative process across his career, and our goal is to bring viewers as close as possible to his ways of making art. Today I will talk about that, but I would like to take the topic a step further by inviting you into our own ways of thinking and organizing the exhibition that is on view in the museum's galleries. I will not only discuss the finished galleries, but also the process of creating them, selecting the works for inclusion, designing the architecture and lighting of the galleries, deciding on the position of each work, and even the physical process of installing individual works in the galleries. I would like to ask you to imagine joining our curatorial team as we prepared the exhibition. Our goal is not to give definitive answers about Picasso's creative process, which is far too fluid and diverse to be defined in a single exhibition, if it can be defined at all. Rather, we try to offer you ways of gaining access to his many methods of making, approaches that we hope will help you to explore Picasso's creative process as you move through the exhibition. The exhibition covers Picasso's career from his teenage years to his final years, and it includes examples of almost every medium he used. In that sense, it is a comprehensive retrospective of his art. However, we present what we believe is an unusual approach. Instead of dividing his art into distinct stylistic periods, as is commonly done, Blue Period, Rose Period, Cubism, Neoclassicism, Surrealism, etc., we've chosen to complicate these stylistic divisions by mixing works from different decades together in the same gallery and juxtaposing near contemporary works that are generally divided into different stylistic groups. This exhibition disrupts the conventional reading of Picasso's artistic development in an effort to bring viewers closer to Picasso's actual process of invention, rather than the convenient categories imposed by critics and scholars. In fact, Picasso did not accept the categories that are commonly used to organize his art. He even rejected Cubism as the usual definition of the work he and Georges Braque made around 1910. And he certainly rejected the further classification of his art into subcategories, such as analytic cubism or synthetic cubism. Instead of dividing Picasso's art into smaller and smaller boxes, we seek to open up the examination of his work by suggesting that he drew on a diversity of artistic approaches throughout his career. For example, what we call Cubism during the years from around 1908 through the end of the First World War is also relevant to his art during the Second World War. In the comparison on the screen, you should take into account that Picasso simplified his Cubism to respond to the austerity of life under the Nazi occupation, while still employing many devices associated with Cubism, such as the flattened perspective of the space in this painting, the multiple viewpoints of the glass and pitcher on the table. In our opinion, Picasso never eliminated an aesthetic option from his repertoire. He only added, and he freely revived and reinvented any approaches that he found useful. As Picasso said in the early 20s, quote, "Whenever I had something to say, I have said it in the manner in which I felt it ought to be said. Different motives inevitably require different methods of expression." And he added, quote, "This does not imply either evolution or progress, but an adaptation of the ideas one wants to express and the means to express the idea," end quote. Besides Picasso's rejection of his art being defined as a succession of stylistic periods, he even rejected the idea of progress in his art, a remarkable position for an artist who has become known in history for his innovations. Here I should add a note of terminology. Despite having just criticized the division of Picasso's art into a series of styles, I will use the common terms in this discussion. I will do this because I imagine that most of you are familiar with these terms, and that familiarity will enable us to maneuver through Picasso's career during the brief time we have together. Nonetheless, I will frequently cast doubt on the accuracy of these terms. I hope this situation will not be too confusing. In the exhibition, Our presentation of Picasso's art attempts to reflect the way he lived and worked. This photograph shows Picasso's studio in his Villa La Californie, where he lived from 1955 to 61, amidst a remarkably diverse assemblage of his art, both old and new. As he faces the camera, Picasso embraces one of his recent sculptures, Standing Woman of 1953, but the room is peopled with works from many decades of his career. One of the earliest, Two Brothers, a painting of 1906, rests on the floor at the far left. It's right here. One of his paintings, inspired by African art, Landscape, 1907, stands on the easel next to a bronze cast of the gods Aa from the island of Ruraturu in the South Seas. The most recent work is a portrait of his wife, Jacqueline, painted in 1960. It's in the lower left corner. The work that tells us the most about this accumulation is the full-size version of Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, a tapestry made in 1958 after the painting of 1907. In case you might think this display was assembled for a photo session, the photographer Edward Quinn testified that, quote, "Nothing was ever arranged specifically for picture taking. The photographs mirror situations as they developed," end quote. Moreover, we have the evidence of the remarkable exhibition Picasso himself hung at the Galerie Georges Petit in Paris in 1932. As you see from these photographs, he freely mixed works from many decades and styles throughout the exhibition. The handwritten dates inscribed next to each work show how much Picasso disregarded the chronology of his art. Instead, he often selected groups of works to show the diverse ways he depicted a particular subject, such as a seated woman or man. This rejection of chronological order and the associated concept of progress in his art suggests Picasso's desire to show not only stylistic diversity, but also to create dialogues across his career. In this installation, we move from a 1902 portrait of a man at the upper right through the classicizing images of the 1920s in the top center to two of his recent paintings inspired by surrealism on the bottom level. Before I speak more about our exhibition, I need to give you some background to explain the origin of the two collections that are represented in the galleries. The collections of the Foundation of Almin and Bernard Ruiz Picasso, called FABO, and the Museo Picasso Malaga. When Picasso died on April 8, 1973, he had not made a will or any formal plans for the disposition of his art, homes, or other property, even though he possessed a vast number of his paintings, drawings, prints, among other valuables. Anticipating his death, the French government had passed laws to allow the payment of death duties in property, including works of art, thereby preventing the liquidation of his collection on the art market to pay these taxes. The works selected by representatives of the French government to cover these taxes constitute the collection of Musée Picasso in Paris. The situation of his heirs, however, was much more complicated, and many years of negotiations passed before the allocation of works among them was settled. Picasso's oldest child, Paul, whose mother was the Russian ballerina Olga Koklova, died 2 years after the artist. Therefore, Paul's widow, Christine, and his surviving children, Bernard and Marina, became primary heirs to the works designated for Paul. This allowed Christine and Bernard to revive Picasso's desire to support a museum of his art here in Malaga. Christine and Bernard gave 233 works which form the collection of the museum. Here, I'm showing you a photograph taken on the day of the inaugural ceremonies. I realize that Picasso's family tree is difficult to map, but there's an essential point to remember that is relevant to our exhibition. All the work on view here came from the art that Picasso kept throughout his life. Moreover, this selection reflects the specific circumstances that shaped the development of Picasso's career across the decades. The most important thing to understand is that while all periods of his art are represented in his estate, Picasso kept very little of his early work. Until he began working with the dealer Paul Rosenberg in 1918, he became successfully financially independent. He had to sell most of the art he made in order to live. On the left, I show you a photograph of the dealer Ambroise Vollard, who is best known for showing the work of Renoir, Gauguin, and Cézanne. Vollard was one of the first Parisian dealers to buy Picasso's art, and he presented an exhibition of Picasso's work in 1901. On the right is the dealer Daniel Henry Kahnweiler, who signed a comprehensive contract with Picasso in 1912 and also represented him during the last decades of his life. Photograph dates from 1964. Since these and other dealers and collectors purchased most of the work Picasso made before 1918, his own collection of work from the first decades of his career was very limited. This historical circumstance substantially defines how FABA, the MPM, and the Musée Picasso in Paris can present Picasso's career. It's an important factor in shaping our exhibition. In some cases, we are not able to present the specific comparisons that would demonstrate our points precisely. Instead, our comparisons are intended to suggest broad patterns across Picasso's career. Now that we have the background out of the way, we can turn to the exhibition and begin a behind-the-scenes look at how we constructed it. We began working towards the exhibition in 2021. Here you see the first and the final plan for Gallery 2, the gallery presenting Picasso's early work. On the left, the two-dimensional plan measures about 1 meter long. You see it as I photographed it on the floor of my studio. Probably you can identify the postage stamp size reproductions of Picasso's work that are placed around the walls of the gallery. Although clearly awkward, this technique is a valuable place to begin because all of the reproductions of the individual works are proportional to the floor plan. This allowed me to see how much space each work would occupy in the actual gallery, even if only in 2 dimensions. If you compare the floor plan with the actual installation, you will see many changes, especially at the top of the floor plan. Originally, we had intended to include the tapestry made after the Demoiselle d'Avignon, which you saw in the photograph of Picasso in his studio. But finally, we dropped it and added the partition holding his 1906 portrait of his companion, Fernand Olivier. There were months of revisions between the first idea and the final plan. Every one of the works in the exhibition had to be examined meticulously before we placed them on display. Here you see one of the MPM's conservators, Laura Vecina, dusting and mapping the bronze head of Fernand that you see installed in its protective cover on the left. Frankly, studying the objects uncovered is one of the greatest pleasures of preparing an exhibition. In the photograph on the left, we also see an example of mixing chronology. Picasso made the painted pottery vase on the left in 1947, but we're showing it with the bronze to suggest concerns with mass and volume that are central to both works. Even though the head of Fernand is considered a sculpture, the vase is characterized as ceramic pottery. Both began as clay and are equally works of art. I thank my colleague Ross Finocchio for the photographs of the installation I will show during the lecture. This gallery also reveals a secret. Behind the partition is a focus exhibition, presenting Picasso's crucial relationship with African sculpture by displaying 3 of his sculptures that Picasso owned. Curated by Joshua Cohen, this small exhibition within the larger exhibition is the first of 5 focus exhibitions by young scholars that are placed throughout the galleries. We are especially pleased to be able to include these in-depth studies as a way to diversify the multiple viewpoints of the exhibition and allow viewers chances to look deeply into central issues of Picasso's art. As you see in the photograph on the right, Joshua's focus exhibition presents a watercolor study for the Demoiselle and a sketchbook related to the painting. More important, it includes 3 African sculptures that Picasso owned and are now in Faba's collection. From left to right, they are a way mask from the Côte d'Ivoire, a gallo, a male figure from Gabon, and a slit drum from the Congo-Vili culture in Angola. Joshua's method is rigorous. unlike many scholars who have studied Picasso's responses to African art by suggesting sources in African works that were not actually available to Picasso, Joshua focuses strictly on African art that was known to Picasso and might truly be sources for his work. Furthermore, Joshua's focus exhibition is exceptional in giving prominence to the African art rather than subordinating it to Picasso's. Like the curators of the other 4 focus exhibitions, Joshua has also contributed a substantial essay on his subject to the catalog. So once again, you can read that in the catalog we have here. In Gallery 3, we dive into Picasso's art from 1908 to the early 1920s. This is one of the most fascinating and complex periods of his art. Rather than trying to simplify this complexity, we try to offer viewers ways to acknowledge it and explore it. At the entrance to the gallery, we present a sequence of works that trace the early years of what we call Cubism from 1908 through 1914. However, we immediately leap beyond this narrow period to suggest that Picasso continued to use Cubist strategies in his work of the 1940s, including his ceramics, which are not often even considered in relation to Picasso's Cubism. In Plate with Glass and Knife of 1947, the second work to the left in this photograph, Picasso not only used the brown tonality that is common to his work from around 1910, but also causes the plate to serve a double purpose as both a literal plate and a part of a still life, an artwork depicting a knife and glass. As is typical of Cubism, the glass is portrayed as if it is seen from 2 viewpoints, above as well as from the side. From this group of Cubist works, the display extends the length of this long gallery to include a particularly varied group of Picasso's styles, ranging from Cubism to his revival and elaboration of the classical styles of art from Greece and Rome to the Renaissance. At the end of the gallery hangs Picasso's portrait of his son, Paul seated on a donkey, which Picasso painted in 1923 and draws on the full range of these classical precedents. The reality is that Picasso freely responded to many characteristics of both these general stylistic categories, Cubism and Classicism, throughout much of the 1910s and 20s. We want to allow viewers to see this remarkable variety and have an opportunity to engage with the real complexity of Picasso's art during this period. On the table near the middle of the gallery are 2 sketchbooks that I will show you in the next slide. I can see them. Yeah, in that space. Here you see a juxtaposition of what we generally call a portrait in classical style, in this case depicting his wife Olga in 1923, and a Cubist still life, which Picasso painted in 1919. I would particularly like you to look at the sketchbooks in the cases below the paintings. One of the truly exceptional features of this exhibition is the inclusion of sketchbooks. These sketchbooks not only show how Picasso developed both his classicizing and Cubist compositions, they also document Picasso's life. Both of these sketchbooks were made during his honeymoon with Olga in the fall of 1918. Next to each original sketchbook is a video screen. It looks blue in the photo. And on the screen, visitors can watch as each page of each sketchbook is turned. Viewers can watch the transformation of Picasso's ideas and the ways his art intersected with his life. This painting, called Studies, was probably painted around 1920. It is the only artwork I will show you that is not in the exhibition. Since the beginning of my career, I've been captivated by Picasso's constantly shifting combinations of invention and retrospection. For those of us interested in these issues, this painting is a touchstone. It's a rare case in which Picasso explicitly juxtaposed styles that are conventionally considered opposites, especially the flat geometry of Cubism and the volumetric masses of classical figures. Whether he painted this picture as a manifesto or as a lighthearted game is uncertain, but the image stands as one of his most direct challenges to hierarchies of style. I don't mean to suggest that I'm the only art historian to explore these issues. My dear friend and colleague Elizabeth Cowling has brought great insight to these questions, and this painting was featured in an exhibition a year ago at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, which explored the work that Picasso made during the summer of 1921. Clearly, the issues we address in this exhibition are of great concern to many scholars of Picasso's art. I believe that they will reshape our understanding of how he repeatedly transformed his art and how we define innovation in his art. Now that we've passed through several of what are generally considered the most important phases of Picasso's art and are near the middle point of his career, I would like to focus on a painting called Man Seated in an Armchair of 1925. It's a painting that fascinates me, in part because it is easily overlooked, but embodies so many of the issues about Picasso's art that our exhibition addresses. As you see from these photographs, the painting hangs in a gallery that includes a wide range of work, bridging from the early 1920s into the early 1930s and spanning the styles of Cubism, Classicism, and Surrealism at the end of the gallery. Like the gallery I just showed you, this long corridor allows us to display an extended series of works to present Picasso's stylistic permutations. Seated Man is at the intersection of these disparate aesthetic choices and show Picasso's remarkable ability to integrate apparently opposites in a complex harmony. Both issues of style and subject matter are central to this composition. The man's features are simplified but clearly legible. If one looks closely at Picasso's art of that year, it's possible that the figure is based on his son Paul, who was 2 years old at that time. However, the painting is clearly not a portrait of a child, or probably a portrait of anyone. Instead, the point of the painting is the multiple and intersecting ways in which Picasso created the image, and of ultimate importance, how Picasso's process of creation becomes a primary subject of his art. This is a fundamental innovation of his art of the 1920s and 30s, which he would explore for the remainder of his career. Not only is the painting composed of distinct layers of pigment, each layer adds a different manner of representation, all of which finally combine to create a dynamic, coherent composition. The layer of deep green is so thinly painted in many areas that the white of the ground layer is visible. This undisguised layering is further emphasized by the way Picasso outlined his figural composition. Instead of drawing on top of the green field, he scraped through the green paint to reveal the white ground color underneath. The design of the figure is made by subtracting pigment rather than adding it. Then Picasso began to fill the facets of the design with opaque pigment, creating a puzzle-like pattern that references his cubism of the previous 10 years. Most important, he chose to leave this puzzle or mosaic unfinished. This is the most interesting feature of the painting. While the image of the man is clearly visible, his lack of completion allows us to look beyond the image of the man to the multiple methods Picasso used to create the painting. While revealing Picasso's creative process, the final composition glides along a continuum from rigorous design to spontaneous gesture. In conventional terms, it combines classicism and cubism with the new ideas of surrealism, the foregrounding of the spontaneous, the unpredictable flights of the imagination. With this new mode of representation added to his repertoire, Picasso had the tools to create the work of his next 4 decades and the remarkable freedom of his last few years. In the same gallery, we have the opportunity to experience a great phase of Picasso's sculpture, the work he made at the Chateau Bois-Jaloux in the early 1930s, and reflect on the ways the issues of style and subject matter I've been discussing in relation to his paintings are also present in his sculpture and create a dialogue among the mediums of painting and sculpture. In the exhibition, we include a wall-size reproduction of a photograph taken in the early 1930s that shows an outbuilding on the estate that Picasso transformed into a studio for making sculpture and plaster. We hope that this arrangement in the gallery will help viewers imagine Picasso at work in this space as he built the two finished sculptures on either side of the mural. Again, I show you a photograph of the installation to emphasize the physicality of the sculpture and its fragility. Frankly, we held our breath as the conservators adjusted the position of the figure's limbs with the greatest delicacy. I think you can see the intensity of their concentration in the expressions on their faces. You should understand that curators are not allowed to touch the art. Only the conservators and art handlers are trusted with that delicate task. I've already suggested that there's a continuity between Picasso's early Cubist paintings and his ceramic plates from the 1940s. In the exhibition, we present the great variety of his ceramics as fully integrated part of his art, except that his female figure of 1948, on view here, includes a utilitarian vase. Is there any reason to separate it from the reclining nude we just saw? One way we hope to engage viewers in this question is the placement of female figure so that anyone standing behind it can look into the last gallery of the exhibition and see it in relation to one of his last sculptures, which I will show you in a few minutes. Referring to that one. I'm not showing these images only to demonstrate the challenge faced by our installation team, although it was considerable, but also to let you see a basic feature of Picasso's sculpture that is not evident in the slide on the left. The photo on the right, the fall of light across the surface of the sculpture, reveals that the interior lines of the figure are not painted on top of the clay, as it might seem, but incised into the wet clay so that they leave a distinct groove in the surface. You might think of Picasso's process in The Man Seated in an Armchair of 1925 and how he used a similar technique in a different medium. When we pass from the gallery showing the metamorphic Boisjoli sculpture, the churning paintings of Picasso's engagement with surrealism, and then into the next gallery, we encounter the impact of the Second World War on Picasso and the ways he transformed the convulsive beauty of surrealism to capture the trauma of wartime experience. We're confronted with a wall of paintings in shades of gray, whose mournful tonality matches the tortured bodies Picasso painted. Yet the largest painting in the gallery, the Trussed Rooster, dates from 1962, nearly 20 years after the war. It is another example of how Picasso revived and transformed his earlier art when he suited him. And it is this painting that I'm referring to. If you look beyond this gallery into the next, you will see another fascinating case of Picasso's disregard of chronology in his work, or his rejection of the idea of progress in his art. The sculpture Seen Through the Doorway is as ardently anti-war as any work Picasso made during the Spanish Civil War or the Second World War. This large bronze depicts a warrior wearing the helmet of a classical Greek soldier. Yet this paradigm of heroic bravery does not fit the stereotype. His bulbous eyes and nose are the opposite of a classical ideal, and the heterogeneous materials supporting the figure make the construction seem fragile and insecure. Picasso constructed this sculpture in 1933 when he was making a series of prints to illustrate the play Lysistrata by Aristophanes, a classical Greek farce that lampoons exactly the features that are traditionally associated with heroic ideals. We chose to break chronology by placing this sculpture in this gallery following the works of the Second World War to suggest its relevance both to the wartime work and Picasso's art during the decades after the war. 30 years separate these two paintings, yet stylistically they could almost be contemporaries. On the left, Woman in a Red Armchair was painted on Christmas Day in 1931. On the right, Seated Woman Wearing a Hat dates from 18 December 1961. With Woman in a Red Armchair, we return to Picasso's involvement with the techniques of surrealism. the foregrounding of improvisation, spontaneity, and evident process, instead of polished, finished works in the conventional sense. Picasso began the painting with a precisely rendered composition, particularly the striped chair, and later chose to turn this precision upside down by obliterating the woman's features in a mass of pigment and leaving the lower figure unfinished. This sequence suggests that Picasso did not initially plan this reversal and acted impulsively in the process of painting. In Seated Woman Wearing a Hat, his process is more methodical, if also liberated. The woman's features emerge in dialogue with the dynamically brushed strokes of the underlayer. This change is significant. Thanks to François Gillot, Picasso's companion during the 1940s and 50s, we have a record of how Picasso described his attitude towards surrealism in the early 50s. During a conversation with Matisse, Picasso addressed a central principle of surrealism, automatism, a method of supposedly allowing the unconscious mind to control an artist's work. Picasso said that, quote, "Since there's no such thing as complete automatism, why not admit frankly that one is making use of all the substratum of the unconscious, but keeping one's hand on it," end quote. He described his process of painting as a continuous non sequitur. It's what you might call a somnambulist thought. That doesn't mean it can't be a kind of directed dream, but that's just as far from pure automatism as it is from rational thought, end quote. This remarkable creative structure was the foundation of Picasso's late work that culminated in the radical paintings and drawings and prints of his last few years. This final gallery of the exhibition includes 6 paintings that Picasso chose for the last exhibition he curated. It opened 1 month after his death in April 1973. Probably, he realized that it would be the final exhibition organized during his lifetime. Certainly, these works startled many of the people who saw them at the Palais des Papes in Avignon. Briefly, I would like to discuss what I believe are 3 central concerns of Picasso's last art, concerns that unify his career and underline his approach in this exhibition. First is the continuing importance of childhood as an inspiration of his art. The second is the roots of Picasso's art in Spanish culture and geography. And finally, the role of his ultimate process of painting, which not only depicts his subjects, but also literally embodies his creative energy and unifies his oeuvre. If you look along the sequence of works, you will see that all 3 of these themes are on display, from the head of a torero on the far right to a child playing with a shovel at the beach on the end wall. All are painted with a brilliance of color and rapidity of brushwork that instills every image, whether historical or contemporary, with tremendous vitality. For a moment, I would like to focus on this sculpture, Bather Playing of 1958. It's one of my favorites because of its varied materials, ranging from wood to plaster, and its crude execution that perfectly matches the playful subject of the sculpture. It was also the most difficult object to place in the museum's galleries. As you see in this photo, Sofia Diaz, my great partner in installing the exhibition, and I were confused about how to position the sculpture. Should it be parallel to the wall, as you see it on the left, or perpendicular, so that it extends into the gallery and viewers can see it in profile as well as frontally? In the photograph on the left, you can see the 2 tape measures we laid out on the floor to evaluate the possibilities. Finally, we chose the position on the right so that the shapes of the bathers are visible from a distance, and the hands of the woman paddling in the water seem to reach toward the painting of a child with a shovel. The sculpture and paintings we have just examined depict life on the shore of the Mediterranean, a life that, of course, began for Picasso with his birth in Malaga and continued to the end of his life along the Côte d'Azur in France. There is no better place to capture the arc of his life than on the beach, and Picasso's evocations of this place unifies his childhood and his adulthood. These themes are elaborated in the final works that the visitors see. The continuing importance of his Spanish heritage underlies his obsession with the musketeers of Golden Age paintings. The courtly gentleman in the center is even painted on ceramic floor tiles, such as are so common here. In the final painting of the exhibition, which Picasso painted in May of 1972, we return to a family group. Of course, this one here. A comically exaggerated cluster of mother, father, and a child who perches on his father's chair with his arms outthrust and his mouth wide open in laughter. For this comparison, I've added his portrait of his sister Lola holding a doll, which Picasso painted around 1896 and is the first work you see on entering the exhibition. When this painting is compared with his last work, we can see how far Picasso had come over the intervening 76 years, and yet how deeply he remained rooted in childhood experiences. He kept the experience alive so vividly through his exhaustive explorations of aesthetic styles and the freedom he celebrated to use them as he chose. Across his long career, Picasso's subjects changed very little, but his continuous transformations of his styles offer us at least a possibility of entering his imagination. Thank you for your attention.
Bueno, buenas tardes.
Well, good afternoon. After this impressive lesson by Michael Fitzgerald, we will open a bit of a more informal debate that will address some of the aspects mentioned in the lecture and some other aspects that I deemed important to discuss with him. I wanted to start by thanking Miguel López Ramiro, Mr. Carmona, and all the foundation, the Foundation Almina and Bernard Ruiz Picasso, for giving me the honor to have a discussion here with Professor Fitzgerald, and also thank Maria Jose Valverde and all the team responsible for education who have organized this event. And I just wanted to say that I made the decision to have this discussion in English. First, because two languages would be a bit of a problem, also out of respect for Professor Fitzgerald. So I apologize for that in advance, and thank you very much for understanding. Well, hello, Mike.
I have to start to say my sincere congratulations, not only for this lesson and for this impressive project of Picasso, Structures of Invention, the unity of his life's work, which is a fantastic title, but also because I have the opportunity of reading the text, and the essays of the catalog is a fantastic publication on Picasso and of the project. And of course, I want to congratulate also all the people involved in this fantastic project, not only the exhibition, but also the catalog. I think the people that have previously talked have already said that, no? I was really impressed with this proposal, with this new presentation of Picasso here with the collaboration of FABA and the Museo Picasso Málaga, because you didn't only break with the canonical accounts about Picasso, but in so doing, you have succeeded in showing Picasso's work with, as you said, two apparently opposing inspirations, innovation and retrospection, with a very simple proposition. You have summarized the complexity of Picasso works presented along these galleries and along this catalog. And this reading of yours promotes a lot of new interpretations about Picasso's work and new ways of looking at his work. And this is the issue that we will deal this after, that you have explained, and we will discuss later. But let me, once we have you here, let me start addressing a problem or an issue that is kind of being discussed nowadays in the art world, and is about the relation in between university and museums. I would like to ask you your personal experience as a professor that regularly, as Pablo Salazar has reminded us, regularly curates exhibitions, and about also the new role of museums as a place of research and a new artistic interpretation. This is very clear now, but this was not the case before. They were completely different worlds not so many decades ago. There were even two different types of art histories. The art history developed in the university, the art history developed by museums. I remember the famous symposium at the Clark Art Institute about this problem, that it was discussed in many ways, no? But in present times, this is not the case, and unfortunately, the scholarship and research is not only in the hands of scholars of the university, but also in museums. And I think that the Center of Studies and Research that has been created here in the museum since Miguel López Ramiro started his directorship, and that is its main leader is Eugenio Carmona, is a proof that this engagement in between university and museums is starting to be important for both institutions. This was a very long desire of Bernardo Ruiz Picasso, and now it's real, no? So it's really very gratifying, no? I want to ask you of your personal experience as both professor, you have the students in front of you, and then you have the curator, your experience as curator, more taking into account not only the research, but also the audience, which is a component that normally you don't have present in the university, I think.
Yes, thank you, Paloma. That's a wonderful question, and certainly of great relevance to what's going on here, but in general, a fascinating one. And I have taken a kind of unusual course through these relationships between the academic world and the museum world, which ultimately was extremely valuable for me. But when I was in graduate school, which was a long time ago, I went to Columbia in New York. There was a great deal of interest in theories of the study of visual arts. It was a time when semiotics and deconstruction were really coming onto the scene, and we were all focused on that kind of thing. There was very little encouragement in actually going out and looking at works of art.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we were in New York, there were lots of museums, galleries, I did go and look, but they were not part of the academic curriculum, you know, at all. And then I sort of took a left turn. I decided that I wasn't going to continue to pursue an academic career once I was completing my doctorate, but I thought I'd do something else. And I ended up going to business school. And after business school, I went to work at Christie's in the auction house. And that turned out to be a remarkable education for me because it was all about objects. Every day I would see something that someone brought in, and I would have to make an evaluation of it. What was its condition? Was it authentic? You know, all of the things that you apply in this situation. The other thing, and maybe this sounds a little bit improper, but in many ways I learned how to write when I was writing catalogs for those sales. Because, as you say, the question of connecting with an audience, you know, how do you communicate? And that's what I was trying to do there. I was no longer writing for graduate students or professors, the academic world. I was writing for a general public. And I've tried to maintain that focus ever since. But what has happened, you know, for this younger generation of art historians is I think there's much more of a merging between these different institutions. My path was a strange one, taking me back into museums. And really, while I am a professor and I maintain that position, most of my work is with museums. You know, that's just the way it's developed. But now, most academic programs that I know do have connections to museums and encourage their students to do that. And similarly, as you say, many serious museums have their own research facilities within them, so that they're not seeing themselves as separate from the academic world, as in many ways they used to. And to me, those centers and museums are the most valuable for students because you're there with the objects. And in my mind, and maybe this is a conservative position, but for me, the most important thing is the work of art. You bring many ways to analyzing it, to study it. You should draw on every possible methodology that you can find that you think might be valuable in doing that, but ultimately it comes back to the object, however you're going to interpret it. And so for me, the museum provides the best opportunity for that, but you do need to bring in the academic as well, and when you can combine them in the museum, I think is many ways the best.
Thank you. Well, I want to come back to one of the images you have shown us, and one of the subjects, issues and themes that interested you in your career, which is the studio of an artist as a subject of research, which is so important, no? This photograph of Edward Queen in La Californie, his retreat in the Midi, you have said, it shows his eclectic accumulation of works of art of different periods, of different materials. And it's important to show how for him, as you said, was showing us or showing himself the unity of his work, okay? You have mentioned anecdotes about Queen, about the importance of the order or the order-disorder of Picasso's studios. Queen said something that even emphasized more the importance of the object in his space, in his sacred, untouchable space. And Queen tells us that Picasso had a friend that wanted to make pictures in his studio, and he went out a little bit, and his friend moved his slippers. When Picasso came in, he saw it immediately, and he said, "You are wrong. The way an artist has his things around him is as revealing as his work." So these images of Queen or many others photographers that have given us the image of the private world of Picasso are really documents for research and for interpretation. But I want to make a little detour and to tell you that for me, I studied a few years ago these pictures, but in another completely different way. And it's also a way to tell you that how this complex world of Picasso can have different interpretations, depending of the focus of your research, no? And of course, they help art historians a lot to make maybe conclusions. few years ago, I was looking at this Edward Quinn's many, many pictures of his studio in La Californie, and suddenly I saw that the works in some of the pictures, Picasso's works of some of the pictures changed, but the tapestry of Les Demoiselles d'Avignon was always there, and a small big photograph of Toulouse-Lautrec. How do you put this?
Just the white one?
Yeah, there, you see it? Was always like in a little altar in the console table that was below the tapestry. So I started to think, what is this photograph of Lautrec doing below the Demoiselles d'Avignon in the 60s? And I was preparing an exhibition about Lautrec and Picasso. At the beginning, my idea was just to focus on the early Picasso years when the dialogue with Lautrec was very evident. And suddenly I decided to research a little more, and I went on and on until his later work. And Bernard with Picasso was so generous to lend us the tapestry. The Musée Picasso Paris lent us the photograph, which is not the original vintage photograph of 1894, but the enlargement that Picasso had in his property. So these pictures for me were a different way to look at Picasso's work, but for you, this is very clever how by this photograph and this disorder, you have come to this unity of Picasso work. And also, I want to ask you, did they help you with your idea, maybe to prove your idea? And also, the installation in Georges Petit in 1932, which is also an installation made by Picasso himself, in a very, as you showed the picture, in a very non-chronological order and non-ordered by sizes or anything, is quite disordered. But I was thinking one day if this couldn't be a kind of more creative way of looking at his work, because he was, at that time, in 1932, Therbos was publishing the first volume of his work, which was radically chronological. So Picasso wanted to give his own proper interpretation that was completely different from Therbos' chronological view. So let us know what you think about that, and if these pictures, these photographs helped you to, or emphasized your idea.
Well, first I'd like to know if you decided why the Lautrec photograph was there.
Well, because that you know well, that all the artists that interest him in his youth were in his mind his whole life. So he was collecting Cézanne, he was collecting other artists. He didn't collect Toulouse-Lautrec, but he had this picture, like in a little altar. I don't know, he was thinking about him. And well, he was, maybe he was giving us a clue about prostitution in the Demoiselles d'Avignon, which I tried to say in the show, but Picasso is always a mystery. He didn't tell us. You have to interpret him.
Yeah, as you say, it is always a mystery, and one can only guess, but that's a lot of the fun of it. I think Lautrec was probably the first French artist that really influenced Picasso when he came to Paris.
Yes.
So, it's almost like you know, the marker, okay, here I am in Paris, and then it runs from there. But who knows, as you say.
Yeah, and he had the same point of view. I think Lautrec interests him not only because of his art, but also, which is really important nowadays, the way he represented women, especially underworld women, with a very respectful point of view. Lautrec lived in between prostitutes, and he was very tender and Picasso was very interested with that also at the beginning, in 1991. So, but that, why not, could have continued throughout his life. The way to interpret, to represent underworld or of the more disadvantaged people of the society. No, that's the point.
Yeah, certainly makes sense. So as to the question of how one enters the issue of these combinations of styles, I think I probably started with the work itself, and particularly that period around 1920 with that painting called Studies, which I wrote about, I guess it was 30 years ago, something like that. It fascinated me, you know, at that time. But seeing those photographs of the 1932 exhibition and the way Picasso hung them, and you may well be right that he's, you know, it's a way of him not to be confined by the art historians, you know, to think, oh, well, you did this day and that day and so forth. You know, I said, no, you know, I'm not going to be contained in that way. I'm going to see this totally differently. Although that is when he started dating his work day by day. So he was kind of appreciating that too. But just seeing that photograph and the way he hung those works, I think gave me a sense of freedom, that it was okay not to follow that strict chronology, and that maybe in doing that, I would come to understand more about the way Picasso was imagining his own process. So one of the wonderful things about that set of photographs, actually, and it is, I think, the only preserved set of the installation, which I found in the archives of the Museum of Modern Art when it had not yet been organized, through a friend who was in the department who told me these things are stashed away, and we found it. But I mentioned the hand notations that identifies the date and sometimes the owner of the work. And that was made by Marga Barr, the wife of Alfred Barr. And she's the one who went to Paris and saw that show and gathered all the information about it, which allowed him to later do his show in the 1930s. So it's another example of how incredibly important women were at the Museum of Modern Art and many other parts of the art world at that time.
Coming to the subject of your concept of innovation and retrospection, that really centers your project, your fascinating projects. I propose to focus this idea on Picasso lifelong interest in portraiture, which I also know it's an issue that interests you, and also I was very interested since many years ago now. And also, for me, Picasso is not only a great master of 20th century, but also maybe one of the biggest portraitists of 20th century. It was a very essential subject for him, also for his artistic experimentation, but he transformed completely the genre. He transformed the way of represented individuality in a very innovative way. I think you have written about that in regard with François Gillot. And And the way he uses a kind of simultaneous pluristylism doesn't confront his idea that portraiture should be done in the line of tradition. He doesn't break with tradition, and at the same time is completely experimenting a new type of portraiture that mixes a lot of his own styles, no? What do you think about Picasso as a portrait painter, and how he evolved around time, a long time, and combined with all his styles through time, through combining these multiple styles in the same painting?
Yeah, it's an incredibly complex
Complex, I know.
and it is one that I have thought about at least a lot in past years, particularly the exhibition at the Modern of Picasso and Portraiture that Bill Rubin did that I participated in. And I had a lot of arguments with Bill. He was the director of painting and sculpture at MoMA then, and a great figure, but now, of course, lost in history. But he decided for this exhibition that he would divide the exhibition based on the women in Picasso's life. So there was a Fernand section, there was an Olga section, and there was a Marie-Thérèse section, so forth and so on. And I told him I thought that was totally wrong, because I didn't really think of them primarily as portraits. They are certainly based on individuals. They show a number of the physical characteristics of particular individuals, but I think they are very rarely about those individuals. They are much more Picasso's projection onto them. Ultimately, if they're portraits of anyone, they're portraits of Picasso, in my view. So, that's a very subtle point, and I'm not sure it's right. Bill didn't accept it, even though he did accept that they were really portraits of Picasso, but he still thought we should emphasize this, that, and the other. And both Lizzie Cowling and I have argued many times about, particularly the fascination with Marie-Thérèse Voltaire now, and particularly in the art market, where those are the greatest pictures. If you can get a hold of one of those, you'll make more money than in any other work by Picasso. But it's because of the biography of the relationship. It's not necessarily about the works themselves. Mm-hmm. And it gets what we know of the biography gets projected onto these paintings, often in a way that I think exaggerates the relevance of that actual biography to the image ultimately that was created. But I don't know.
Okay, so his proper art was on top of the individuality, no?
I think.
Okay. I'm going to go a little away from your discourse, and I would like to ask you that, well, I must admit that when I saw your exhibition and I read your essays in the catalog, I couldn't help remembering The Unity of Picasso, the posthumous publication by Professor Meyer Shapiro. He also talks about the diversity of materials, styles, and he also finds a unity, a very meaningful aesthetic unity in his work. But correct me if I am wrong, your approach to the unity of Picasso desires to involve the viewer in Picasso's creative process, whereas Shapiro proposes a more psychological questions to the contemporary beholder, because, for example, he asks, how does Picasso's career as a whole, as observed through the variety of works, speak to us as human beings? And I would like to ask you, in a little way, like the focus of Shapiro, in which way your structures of invention speak to us in the 20th century, speak to us in or can affect our pursuit for a better world. In other words, this show can help us, like Picasso does in many occasions, to understand the present, the politics, the problematics of art, the problematics of individuals. Have you thought about that?
Somewhat. Yes, it is, of course, a hugely important issue these days, whether art can really guide us in trying to make our world better than it is, because I think, as we all would say, there are tremendous issues that we're confronting now in so many different directions. And Picasso can be a problematic figure, in looking at that, because in certain ways, his art does embody some of the very serious social problems that we are confronting. I think what, to me, is sort of redeeming about some of the criticism, some of it legitimate, some of it not, of Picasso, is that his work still embodies the possibility of solving issues that deal with the question of races, particularly of European culture and African culture, issues of gender, of the way in which women are represented within his work. So many artists, and I think particularly, say, of Matisse, these issues are there, but they don't really seem to be at the top of the list. They're not things that you really have to focus on. With Picasso, they're unavoidable. And to me, that's what keeps them alive. It doesn't necessarily mean that we have to love the solutions that Picasso came to, but that he did keep them in the contemporary world. So many of the artists, and particularly when I did the post-Picasso exhibition not so many years ago, we had a number of African artists in that show, and I very much wanted to do that specifically because, of course, African art was so important for Picasso's work. And they all told me, and I didn't select them on this basis, that they had learned a tremendous amount from Picasso. And the way in which African art was integrated into European art was, for them, allowed them to learn a great deal about the African art itself. So that I think it's just the deep problematic nature of Picasso's work, its complexity, its contradictions, that ultimately really keeps it alive.
Completely agree. Well, and last but not least, I want to come back to the beginning about the importance of research and continuing the study of Picasso work. But in a period in which the narratives of avant-garde are under deep scrutiny, as you said, Picasso has an ambiguous and contradictory position. In one hand, it's evident that he's one of the most celebrated artists of the 20th century, especially by the public, or the great master of modernity by historians like me. But he also has become a very controversial figure, especially among the younger generations, the younger, not maybe artists, but scholars, students, and I think, and it's something that I talk a lot with my professors that are friends of mine, the younger historians and maybe younger curators have turned away from him. But as I think that art history is only a proposition rather than a certain truth, and it evolves and transforms over time, I would like to see a kind of hope in the future. And so I would like to ask you if, with the distance of history, future generations of art historians will come back to Picasso. And I would like to ask, because I'm convinced of that, if your successful formula of the small focused exhibitions in this project, curated by young scholars, could be a model, could be a point of change, a new point for change. And well, let's hear what you think about this and how do you see the perspectives of Picasso studies in the future?
To a certain extent, the future of Picasso studies I'll leave to the young people. You know, I don't want to dictate what people should be doing now.
Are you optimistic?
Yes, I think I am, but just because I enjoy it so much, I hope other people will also enjoy it and join in. But you've just had the ECHO exhibition here, which includes so many contemporary artists. And clearly, that is an indication that there is a considerable body of work. There probably are fewer artists now that are responding to Picasso than there were in 1950, something like that. But it's still, I think, an important part of the dialogue. And I do think that by encouraging the 5 young scholars that we did to work on focused projects, in some cases they were already very involved in Picasso's work, in some cases they weren't. And sometimes we had to convince them that it was worth thinking about Picasso, but I think they all found that indeed it was very rewarding. And we do intend to continue the program to bring opportunities to younger scholars who would like to study Picasso, but I certainly don't want to dictate to them how to do it, just to try to get them to consider the possibilities.
Okay, well, I think we will leave it here because it's time for changing to the other subject. I really thank you for your project. It's really will widen a lot of points of view of Picasso and has been very, for me, it's been a revelation.
Well, thank you, Paloma. So, yes, I think we have the timeline.
María José Valverde
has asked me to open up a Q&A session, just in case there's somebody in the room who wants to make a question. The lady has stated if anybody has a question, we have now a Q&A session, and if not, we will go.
Sure, that's okay. Well, first of all, thank you so much for this wonderful talk. And at the beginning of it, you were mentioning your intention as a curator to escape reducing the artworks to a specific narrative and to just bring the complexity of it. And so I wanted to ask, how do you find that balance? So how do you make art sort of speak for itself without reducing it to a narrative, without simplifying it? And yeah, in other words, where should the curator stand in this exercise of presenting art to an audience?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because, honestly, I don't think the curator should be forcing interpretations on works of art. On the other hand, we need to do something to try to bring to an audience insights that we believe are accurate and that might not be apparent to them. So it's a very delicate balance, and I try not to overstep. I do think there's been a tendency among curators to make the curator the artist, and the artist simply the tool that the curator uses to present some idea. I hope very much not to do that, although perhaps we have at times in the exhibition. But we did feel like we had an argument to make that is an accurate one about Picasso, and that we could just place a few of these breaks of chronology or combinations of media that were unconventional through the exhibition, just to suggest that this is something that the viewer might think about and look for on their own, as a starting point for the audience, not a final conclusion to say, this is what you have to think, but consider this as a possibility. So it's a subtle balance, and I'd be very happy if we achieved it. It depends on the individual, whether or not they respond, how they feel about it. So, it's a work in process.
Yeah, I think Michael is being very delicate about this issue, because it's true that our star curators that want everybody to think like him. It's like a very fixed proposition. But I completely agree that the curatorship of a project or a museum installation should be completely open. It's just a proposition, and the visitors or the scholars or the students should have their own conclusions. Mm-hmm. And it's a way of provoking emotions and provoking responses, no? But of course, the curator is the person that has made the research, made the studies profoundly about the subject or about the artist, and all that proposition might convince a lot of people and help them to think of other things, but not always is the case. Sometimes it's like a very closed idea, and you have to think like him or like her. Mm-hmm. No, it's so. But art is always an open matter. Yes. And very personal and very individual. Mm-hmm. Think. No? Mm-hmm.
We do have the timeline to present, so should we move on? Okay. Well, thank you all for coming.
Muchas gracias, Paloma.
Thank you very much, Paloma Alarco. Do you listen? Yes, can you listen to me? Paloma, thank you very much. Michael, thank you very much. I just wanted to thank you for this very interesting conversation that you just had. Like the art director said, it's just the beginning of a series of masterclasses that will be carried out over the next few years. Right now, we will conclude this masterclass here in the auditorium. We will say goodbye to those following the session through streaming, and we will go to the museum now, to the inner courtyard, where we will be able to see the already inaugurated live line, and then you will be all invited to have a coffee together and continue discussing all these subjects. Thank you very much.